So as you remember, we were describing the structure, the policy structure of a housing and neighborhood development program, and covered 2 points. The first point being the issue of a gradient of public financing and public partnership on development projects. The second being the need to establish an organizational infrastructure that's focused really on reinvestment. We talked about a couple of components: a development entity, a community development corporation. We'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, in the discussion at the end. A financing mechanism. Often obviously the city is a key component of that process, and a land bank can also be quite important, because as you'll see when we talk about a North Salina strategy, the idea of acquiring property and holding property in advance of redevelopment is a pretty significant element of that process. And having an entity that can do that, hold on to property for a while, and then dispose of it consistent with an overall plan for the neighborhood is an important element. A third point is what we refer to as a value-added neighborhood development program. And we, when we're thinking about neighborhood development strategies, there are 2 elements of the pie. One is to build affordable housing to meet those demands that are not being met solely by the unassisted private sector. But on the other hand, we want to create a self-sustaining economy in neighborhoods. So in a way, the increasing property value to the point that the market begins to work might seem to be counter to the priority of developing affordable housing, but it really isn't. That ultimately, when we're thinking about neighborhood health, adding value and increasing property values is going to be a critical component of that, because that really is one of our fundamental problems, that we have neighborhoods where the typical value of property is below the replacement value of the housing units in that neighborhood. So how do we do that? Well, there are a couple of mechanisms that are proven that can be very successful in getting that done. One of those is repair of the public environment. One of the most powerful is repair of the public environment. If we have deteriorating sidewalks, broken curbs, poor surfaces on streets, and just kind of a long in the tooth view or look in the public environment, that makes it very hard to encourage reinvestment, whether it's on an institutional scale in terms of new development or infill development, or even more important, from just the process of getting people to paint up their houses and work on their own. Street rehabilitation can be a very powerful component of neighborhood revitalization, and it's particularly powerful because it's been proven. A great example of this is the west side of Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is a city very similar to Salina in many ways, and certainly in size, where they have found that a street rehabilitation program has been very, very successful in terms of encouraging both infill development and private rehabilitation. So value-added neighborhood development means things like funding on a predictable year-by-year basis as a discrete budget element, a program to reconstruct or resurface neighborhood streets, curbs, sidewalks, and so forth. Other elements of a neighborhood development program from a public sector point of view involve site acquisition for future development, as providing infrastructure for new development projects as well. The example that's up here on the screen is a project in Excelsior Springs, Missouri, there was a project that we actually proposed as a redevelopment project in a deteriorated block north of downtown Excelsior Springs that the city then undertook and built really this beautiful project. It's built by a private developer. It's a, you can believe it, a low-income housing tax credit project, but looks nothing like a low-income housing tax credit project. The city did new street construction and curbs, and it's really a lovely project that replaced a very deteriorated part of downtown. So providing the infrastructure to support new development and supporting development incentives like RHIDs or TIFs that again involve public sponsorship to make a project happen are all ways in which we can use the public sector and government priorities to help add value to a neighborhood and to create an environment that provides incentives and encouragement for private reinvestment. You know, it's interesting that a project like the Hawthorne Apartments in North Salina, I think because of its visibility, has had a tremendously beneficial effect on that neighborhood, and that is a lesson to learn from. Finally, the fourth point are targeted revitalization projects, and in our concept, which we'll get to in just a minute, we're talking about two levels of reinvestment. One is selecting a project that has a strong economy and a strong probability for success, where we can actually build something, get something down on the ground that provides a visible, affordable housing result and outcome that also improves the neighborhood, and use that as a way of leveraging a more multi-year approach to more comprehensive neighborhood revitalization. So we'll talk. So those four elements are, from a policy point of view, of establishing a continuum of public improvement partnership, depending upon the setting that we find ourselves in. Number two, the development mechanism that includes a way of accomplishing development, of financing development, of banking land, and finally establishing the city as a partner is the second point of the organizational infrastructure. Three is establishing on the city side a program that provides strategic neighborhood development assistance and improvements to add value to neighborhoods and to create the environment that encourages private reinvestment. And fourth, identifying and executing target revitalization projects, we think is the framework for moving forward in a redevelopment program. When we talk in the document about where to start, and that's our segue into the next phase of our discussion, we identified several interesting project areas that have specific appeal for focused redevelopment. It's important, first of all, to, wherever these sites wind up being, to establish criteria to evaluate whether these are good places to work or not. And we think that these criteria are, first of all, the area needs to be large enough to develop a project that begins to change the image of a neighborhood, or stabilize a neighborhood, or do some kind of thing that improves an area. So we're not persuaded particularly by, and in my experience, it really never has worked well, to do very scattered single lot infill approaches, to have one house here and one house there and another house 3 blocks away. It is, infill works when we can put together a big enough combination of lots that it actually creates a critical mass that changes the image of a neighborhood. So being able to put together a project that's big enough to see and that can make an impact, and an impact that's a positive one, is an important criterion. A second is that the project should be visible. It should be something that people see, in a way, a billboard for what can be done. Maybe visible within a local area. It doesn't have to be on an arterial street, but it should make a difference. You know, it doesn't do a lot of good in the first stage to bury something back where nobody is really aware of it. Usually doesn't work out very well either. Number 3, that the project should be important enough to be part of a community agenda, that it actually does something of significant value. Number 4, it should be strong enough to take advantage, to have a good chance of succeeding, and to take advantage of existing assets within the area. So those assets might be schools, they might be a commercial attraction, a previous project, a park, a trail, a downtown district. They shouldn't have, their chances for success are not as strong if those positive attributes are missing. So when we thought of candidates for targeted places to start, some of the things that seemed, some of the areas that seemed interesting to us include one that we feel very strongly about, and that's the 5 Points area in North Salina. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what that might look like. And by the way, my feeling is that the seminal project at 5 Points is not housing at all, but it produces conditions that can generate housing. The depot area at 12th and Bishop, in that area, in that district, seems very exciting to us as a follow-on to a North Salina project. We'll talk a little bit more about the depot area in a little bit later in the discussion. We know that this one is controversial, but we love the Centennial Park area. Everybody will laugh at that, but there is a way of making a good project work that can also make something work for the neighborhood as well, and that approached properly can have a high probability of success and increase the value of the neighborhood. There's a site at 4th and Prescott that's near the hospital campus, that's located between the hospital and Kenwood Park. That's an interesting piece of property. There's a property at Broadway and Cloud, that on the south side of Cloud, that also appears to be interesting and to have is vacant and has some of these opportunities for success. So each of these sites is visible in their way. They're not gigantic. The North Salina one is obviously going to be the most ambitious, and it's going to involve the biggest long-term commitment, but I think also has the greatest rewards. But it's important to take one project as a pilot that's small and doable, that could be done either by the private sector in partnership with the public sector, or by a CDC or TOTO, again in partnership with the private sector, that can demonstrate a market and can create a model that can be replicated in other areas. So now let's go into what we consider Chapter 4, and that is that called Balancing Growth and Infill Development Strategy. Again, we are encouraged by the people we talk to on the public and private side about people who recognize the need to reinvest in older neighborhoods in Salina, and to not just develop on the edges, but to come back in the center and strengthen values there as well. And believe again that there is a good environment to get that kind of effort done. And we think that the first stage in this process is doing something that's relatively easy to do, that has a very high chance of success, that could be developed as either a private sector or a CDC type project that can address and demonstrate housing markets in an area. And so the site that we focused on, not wanting to pick the easiest one in the world, was Centennial Park. We know that this has been tried, that there was an effort to develop it. It didn't succeed. There was neighborhood opposition, and as an eternal optimist, we wanted to take a crack at something here that would improve things for everybody. So what we're suggesting is using the south side. You know, we know that the park did not involve the. I'm going to open my red thing here, the glass. This was once a residential neighborhood that was tornado damaged. We could still see the driveways and so forth, and it was really not part of the park. The proposal that we understood did not meet with success to redevelop that whole area, and we're wondering here about splitting the difference. That is, could we build a 10-house, a single-family, small lot development, owner-occupied development, build a street through the middle of it, have these units be alley loaded, as you can see, and then expand and improve the park with trails and playing areas to the north of it, so that we wind up with 10 owner-occupied houses that are at least the value of surrounding properties, and probably would ultimately be above those, that are street-oriented, so that it's not an apartment complex, it's not particularly a low-income project, and at the same time expand the park, relate the park to new housing development, to do park improvements in terms of play areas and multi-use lawns, and really make this a great demonstration of how infill housing can work, can demonstrate a market for that, and can do something that tremendously upgrades a neighborhood as well. Again, it will take some work to get this done, not so much financial work, because it will make sense economically, and it is a neighborhood that's got the assets in terms of schools and surrounding commercial and reasonably self-sustaining property values, but could be very effective and give something to everybody, creating a win-win situation. So we put that out as one of several possibilities for a quick win that demonstrates that we can, in fact, organize and build great stuff and do it in a way that makes a good existing neighborhood even better, rather than placing a burden on that neighborhood. So that is step one. Step two is identifying. Now we're going to go deeper, and we have accomplished a project that it might have taken a year or two to get built, but it's done, it's up and running and successful. We have a project under our belt, and a significant success to talk about. And now it's time for a much deeper dive into another neighborhood. By the way, one of the ideas of the demonstration of the pilot project is to get some of these other properties that we've identified to happen as well. But it can be done more or less on the private side without this kind of deep assistance. So a demonstration that leads to other things on one branch of the tree, the other branch then being, let's look at our primary target area, North Salina, and develop a strategy that can over time, and it's not quick. It's not. We'll do everything at once, and the whole and the world will be saved. It is a slow, careful, step-by-step process that can lead to the revitalization of what we believe is a very important part of the city. So, let's say that we now establish that. We establish North Salina as the focus of this kind of comprehensive approach. And by the way, some of the other assets that we think are important there are the fact that there is a development corporation active in North Salina. We had very good turnouts at the meetings that we had there. And also, there's room for new development in North Salina. There are sites that number one could be upgraded if they're distressed. Number two, also provide places where we can ultimately, in the long term, provide opportunities for future subdivision development if we're smart and lucky and the market takes off there. Finally, it's the north entrance to the city, and the 9th Street entrance off of I-70 is not an insignificant way into the city, and the appearance of that corridor is also quite important. So now we get to ideas for details. The beachhead, we think, in North Salina, the kind of heart and epicenter of that community is the Five Points intersection. It always happens that way because when you get a complicated intersection, it's something that people find to be unique and more or less gravitate and does have aspects of the business center. So as we thought about the beachhead, and some of these ideas are maybe a little fanciful and may not happen, but hopefully they're a demonstration of a set of scenarios or strategies that can lead to good things. The first thing that we think can be very important is commercial development as opposed to only residential growth. So a couple of things we've recommended that include the improvement of the terminus of Pacific Avenue that just kind of drops into the Pacific and Broadway and 9th intersection. This would be a little public improvement project that involves new parking and landscaping. Of course, there's already been a nice little landscaping project on the convenience store point. Related to that is a commercial revitalization project. We're very intrigued by, I'm going to return to this in a minute, but very intrigued by the Midas Muffler shop, which is now vacant, and about what that could be, because we've seen this happen before. So here's Midas Muffler, and here is a project that was an old gas station that has become a huge catalyst for neighborhood revitalization in Williston, North Dakota, a long way away. But it is Three Amigos restaurant. It's also a yogurt shop. It's a very similar sized building, and by virtue of developing something that attracts people from all over the city to this site, because it's got good food and and an outdoor environment in the 1.5 months where you can be outdoors in Williston.
Say they sell frozen yogurt.
Yeah, I'm trying to make frozen yogurt. Well, and that has become a huge attraction, and that kind of a commercial incentive can be a very powerful thing in terms of beginning the revitalization process and creating a magnet that people ultimately want to live around. So, think about the issue of adding value. That does it.
So I have to ask, if I'm not mistaken, Williston, North Dakota is an epicenter of the fracking boom, with a huge amount of really degrading investment in that total community. So can you give us some perspective about how that fits into the whole boom? Is the town made capable of doing it because of that? And how does that affect the rest of the economic environment?
Well, Williston, we've worked extensively in Williston, so I know the site very well, and have done a zoning ordinance, their new zoning ordinance, and the downtown plan. It's very interesting because some of it slowed down now because it's not dead, but it's slowed down. A lot of what's being built in some parts of the city are really rather high quality, are rather good things. They've had during the height of the fracking boom, they had housing costs that were sort of similar to Manhattan's. So a 2-bedroom apartment would rent for $3,000 to $3,500. So it's kind of dropped back, if you can. I mean,
Yeah, they have studios for $1,200.
Studios, yeah. To the degree that that county government built a housing project for employees, built a downtown, and the hospital did the same thing. So this is in the old part of Williston. This is not on the edge. It's across from a city park. It's a neighborhood that is a fairly solid edge of downtown neighborhood, and this little restaurant has just been extraordinarily successful. I mean, its menu is sort of not dissimilar from Santa Cruz downtown, sort of a burrito, very pleasant place with yogurt attached to it. The city has built a lot of more suburban kinds of restaurant credits, but it's really become a real attractor at this intersection. And that's kind of the theory here, is that if we, 9th and Broadway is very close to downtown, and it's quite convenient to most parts of Salina. And so if a feature is built there that's got good public exposure and done well, and becomes a commercial magnet that has good food and a good environment, that creates an anchor that helps create an environment that people want to live around. So, and that's the idea of a beachhead, is take a small area and make it work. So some other components of this include a scheme for commercial, for some commercial revitalization, again on vacant sites, on the Woodland to Broadway block of along Woodland, doing a little bit of infill housing development. These are existing units, making the circulation work a little better. In other words, taking that triangle and making it work more successfly. Some of these other things are later phases of a project. And there are assets, cleaning up some of or screening some of the storage yards that are adjacent to buildings, using assets like the motel, which is actually very nice, building successfully. This is actually the Seventh-day Adventist Church and doing a couple of infill units next to that. So it's taking this kind of little area and by the way, looking at a roundabout at 9th and Pacific, but that's not a critical issue. But you know, you put a monument in the middle of it, and it actually could be pretty. It's the kind of intersection that roundabouts really work effectively at. Oh yeah, right. That's right. And connecting this to Hawthorne Park, and you know, it's sort of building a framework that begins to make sense. So if we look at this now in a broader range area, the key target area is this center around 5 points: new construction, commercial revitalization, the reuse of Midas, a couple of infill units alongside the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Another interesting component of this would be on the, I think that's the 9th and, Harsh side, or Hamilton, I'm sorry, Hamilton. On that vacant lot along 9th Street of doing a rent-to-own project. There would be infill townhouses, and a rent-to-own is a program by which renters accumulate equity. Portion of rent is placed into a fund that's an escrow that is then used in the future for down payments, either of those or of other units in the city. So it's a way of a rental unit actually implying a level of equity building that then converts to home ownership. Number 5 is taking the area between Hamilton and Pacific, those 6 blocks, and doing the kind of street reconstruction and rehab effort that we talked about, doing some spot rehabilitation as well, making the park improvement and connection, completing the second phase of the Hawthorne Apartments, and probably in the most controversial element of this would be acquiring the Airliner motel site for future redevelopment. It comes at a later stage. This motel is very nice. The Airliner, which is primarily permanent housing and not very good permanent housing, is one of those sites that is ultimately big enough and visible enough that it really could become a significant anchor in the neighborhood.
I was just saying, a couple questions I had gotten. I think like item number 2, where we're showing that idea of the rent-to-own. Does that happen on the east side or the west side of 9th Street? It could happen probably on either side of the street. The idea is that we're showing some change on that corridor, and it might work out ultimately that the properties on one side of the street are a little easier to assemble than the other.
Well, now it's vacant.
Yeah, that side was vacant. And again, on the item number 5 and the rehabilitation focus area, I think I'd gotten a question, well, doesn't the whole area need a rehabilitation? It probably does, but we got again, that idea of starting in kind of a concentrated area that we can then begin to radiate out from was the thought process.
And that's a very good point, because it's easy to try to make everybody happy, and as a result of that, to spread out the effort so far that it doesn't really do any good. And that's why a key message that we would like to leave is that the approach is a patient one. If you're not the first in line, it doesn't mean you're forgotten about. It means that it moves out from a beachhead, from a center. So just like if we were, if I hate to use a war analogy, but you would not conduct a successful military campaign by putting at least, well, you might, but it wouldn't succeed, of landing a few troops over here and a few troops over there and a few troops over there and hoping they all somehow converge. It's much more effective if it fans out from a point of success. And it seems to us that the 9th and Pacific and Broadway intersection and the area immediately around it is really the place to start. Visible, it has assets like the existing apartments in the park. It's visible, people see it. It does have some signs of life and of enterprise. And it's the kind of area where we can make a successful business work and a combination of rehab and new construction approaches that really can make a difference. Keep in mind that these are not one-year phases. These are things that might take a few years to happen because they do represent significant investments. But at the end of 3 years, we have a piece that now gives us the opportunity to move forward. So the next stage of the process is to now move outward from completion. I think maybe, stage 3. 3, 4, I don't know.
Yeah, 3.
Okay. So now in our theory here, we have an opportunity now to take a site at 9th and Woodland and maybe do an apartment complex there that's designed in such a way that the parking is along 8th Street and it has a direct relationship to Hawthorne Park. There are a couple of properties here that are used for like truck storage, and we looked at the idea here of extending Hawthorne Park along the south side of Woodland with a crosswalk that then leads into the Airliner Motel site, which would then be redeveloped again with higher density but still single-family, semi-attached housing. So the scheme here is a scheme that worked very successfully in our city, Omaha, of doing not very nice kind of units that are, again, ownership units connected by a garage, so that you don't actually have a common wall with another apartment. The garages separate these units, and it's been a tremendously successful project in Omaha at like $180,000 to $240,000 price point in downtown. The liquor store site could be a new commercial project. Again, all these things are linked together and back into Hawthorne Apartments. And they take the momentum created by the beachhead and start to expand that out and do more ambitious projects with it. Now again, the philosophy is almost more important than the demonstration. So it may or may not be this site, it may or may not be developed in this way, but the concept is to start at a point of high visibility, provide the resources necessary to get that job done, and then move out to bigger projects that are related back to that initial beachhead. So now if we kind of pan out to go beyond this area, we've now taken our rehab, street reconstruction, neighborhood development area and expanded that up another block to the north. We've identified a series of infill lots that's immediately southeast of St. John's that are right now either vacant or for the most part vacant or houses that are probably pretty obsolete. Assemble those and have the critical mass to develop about 18 units of new housing that again has the critical mass necessary to establish a new neighborhood and to transform the image of that area. There are a couple of possible apartment sites in other parts of the neighborhood. So by doing these kinds of efforts, targeted rehab, infill, some opportunity sites along the edges of the neighborhood, and a pretty good neighborhood to begin with in north of Pacific and east of 9th, we set up bringing that area up to a state of health. We then have future acquisition component as well that involves the acquisition of these 2 mobile home parks, the one at the end of Antrim and the one at the end of 13th Street. And interestingly, we found that those are not all in floodplain. A lot of the pieces of it are, but some of it is actually buildable. And again, we're not necessarily, this is a ways down the line. It's not immediate efforts. Although if for some reason those opportunities opened up, a land bank should be standing by to be able to acquire those properties. But as you can see, this is beginning to get us into another area that we know is developable, that's vacant, that gives us the opportunity of doing new development that begins to balance development to the south and the east as well. So the infill development phase that includes both existing sites, and then the future opportunity to expand beyond that is this that happens in this phase. Now, as we move on, we believe that we've begun to elevate the market to the point where significant single-family development begins to be feasible. That we're now creating stability, private reinvestment activity, rehabilitation, and so forth, that starts to make new, maybe more conventional single-family development an option. And we've shown a couple of models for how the 13th Street site and how the mobile home sites and a piece of the area on the other side of the creek can begin to develop. So here on the Antrim site, that's mobile homes, we developed a nice little higher density townhome project. On the 13th Street mobile home park, we take 13th Street, connect that up to a future street that begins to open up that northwest growth corridor, do a cul-de-sac, and are able to develop, I think it's about 15 lots off of a cul-de-sac. Also with extending Harsh Avenue from 12th Street to this point. And you can see that now we begin to develop precedent for more conventional single-family growth. Also, not insignificant is our community amenities. We have basically a park preserve along the creek. We can develop a trail along that will then tie back into Pacific Park and into Hawthorne Park and link all of these features together. And so the beginning of a broader neighborhood begins to take place. And then finally, we get to the point where these street extensions that have gone this far in stage 5 now can get extended up to Euclid, link back along the circumferential trail, and create an overall subdivision, which actually has a mirror on the northeast as well, that now make this a viable growth center over the years. So you can see that we start small. We start with one contained geographic area and then expand that phase by phase, piece by piece, increment by increment, and wind up with a development that now has a mix of incomes and a mix of housing types that begins to balance out growth between the north and the south sides of town. So any comments? Yeah, or questions?
You use the term assemble. Is eminent domain in there anywhere?
Well, that is a question of local appetite. So we don't care how it's assembled. You know, I mean, somebody could look at this and say, "Wow, that's really a great idea. I'm going to go after that that property, and that would be the best thing. Or there's a private market transaction that takes place, or just in the course of events, people say, well, you know, my old motel or my mobile home park had a good run, but now it's time to do something else. So, I mean, eminent domain is a very nasty word, and you hope that you don't use it. But there are times where, you know, let's say public acquisition, it may not be involuntary, it might be negotiated, but it has to be considered.
Marty, one point, in Kansas, like many other states now, you cannot use eminent domain to benefit a private developer or
Right.
development. So
Right.
the only reasons you can use it have to do with infrastructure, parks, other types of municipal facilities.
Yeah.
So really the use is limited now compared to what it would be
Yeah.
many years ago.
Yeah, it is much more limited in Kansas. Let's say that a property like this were acquired and were acquired on the private market. The developer of that project might very well be a nonprofit corporation, or a nonprofit corporation that works with home builders to build the units in the project. So the actual development funds for construction come from, one way or another, come from the private side. The acquisition funds might, in theory, come from the city through private negotiation, or be provided to the nonprofit developer, and the city would then build the infrastructure, the extension of Harsh Avenue, and the cul-de-sac and the utilities that are needed to serve that project. There are devices that can help with that financing. So, for example, the RHID, or Rural Housing Incentive District, Rural Housing Initiative District. I can't remember whether the I is incentive or initiative, but it's basically a tax increment tool that uses added taxes from a residential project to build infrastructure and utilities and so forth that are needed to support that project. So you can see that it winds up becoming a combination of private funds and public funds, on the grounds that the infrastructure and possibly the land financing might involve some level of public help in order to get the deal to happen. And some of that might be on a grant basis or a bond basis, and some of it might be on a recoverable basis through the RHID or TIF instrument.
Mark, question. How much of the success that you have seen is attributable to having like federal or state funds, such as neighborhood revitalization funding, those kind of things? Is it pretty much imminent that you have to have that in order to do this, or is it just easier?
I would say it's, in some ways it's harder because it comes with strings attached. Not that it should be, a lot of it depends upon the structure of the project. So, I mean, home, for example, home investment partnerships have very specific income restrictions, which may or may not be consistent with the city's objectives. I mean, it may be that the best thing to do here are $250,000 houses. You know, that you'd never, you want that kind of income integration in a neighborhood like this. So a project at a different scale, like this one or even this one, might be a more appropriate target for federal funding, and a more conventional single-family project might be funded locally without or through non-federal sources that are not so income constrained. It's also if the city, as we hope, thinks about reinvestment and neighborhood redevelopment as a useful investment in the future of the city that just needs to be done and budgets for that, then that money obviously does not have strings attached to it. You know, it can be used and it can be invested in ways that, if properly done, will produce multiple returns on that initial investment. So, you know, to my mind, the more that can be done locally, the better. The more that can be done locally, the better. But sometimes, because of various programmatic issues or economic issues, you seek federal funding. But I don't think it's essential for the most part. First of all, in kind of thinking about this concept, we tried to minimize any relocation of existing businesses. So, this appears, I don't know if it is or not, but it appears to be a vacant building. The pink is the existing business there, which we are suggesting in this concept expands, and then behind it is a row of new enterprises, offices or retail. These are existing buildings. That would be the reuse of a vacant building. This might be a new project. A lot of this land is actually created by realigning alleys and circulation in a way that's a little bit less confusing and opens up some new site areas. So you can see that rather than backing up onto Broadway, there's an equal number of parking stalls that are provided that are off-street. So it's just, in some ways, some of this land is made up just by using the real estate that we've got more effectively without relocating anybody. So, but
If that was necessary, though, would a land bank be more helpful and/or would that mechanism facilitate that? Or
yeah, it could. It could. And a land in a phased situation like this, a land bank is always really helpful because it's basically a way to bank to park land. The other thing that's interesting is that you know, let's say that a property or two or three or four in other parts of the neighborhood become deteriorated, and there's an opportunity for a sale. Land banks are invaluable for addressing those opportunities. Or a house comes up for sale that's rehabilitatable, and a land bank wants to buy that property so that it can get into an acquisition rehab resale framework, as opposed to going to an investor owner who's collecting properties for the short term. That kind of an acquisition mechanism of somebody who actually can go in and negotiate and buy land and hold it is very useful. By the way, let me explain what acquisition rehab resale is. Amy said earlier this, and by the way, this is something that we think really does make a lot of sense on an incremental basis in North Salina. Amy was mentioning the adversity that younger households have to fixer-uppers right now. So the idea of acquisition rehab resale is that an entity, often a community development corporation, buys a single-family house that is rehabilitatable or maybe has an expansion opportunity at a good price, rehabilitates that house, and resells it at the cost of purchase plus acquisition plus an administrative markup. So it's a way of if things work out right, of being able to sell a nice, newly rehabilitated, modernized house at a $90,000 to $100,000 price point that would require $150,000 to $170,000 to build new. So it's that kind of that's that kind of a program. By default, right now what's happening is that somebody is buying that property, not doing very much work on it, and then renting it out for a few years till it falls apart. So there are a number of organizations around the country, including one called the Holy Name Housing Corporation in our city. They've been very successful at that program. It's prevalent in Minnesota, as are a lot of community development programs. And in a neighborhood where we've got a number of houses that are relatively available at relatively low prices, it's a great program.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I mean, my husband's hometown in Nebraska, 5,000 people, actually has a very successful housing rehab
It's Wayne,
program.
yeah.
In it too.
Wayne,
So you
Nebraska.
don't have to be
You don't
a
have to
big
be
city
big to do that.
to do this.
And are there, say, tax incentives or something to do that?
Well, there could be, but the premise here, I mean, there are a couple of ways to do it. One is that it's and typically it's done by a nonprofit or a community development corporation. There's no tax advantage there because there are no taxes. They're nonprofits, so they're basically flipping houses, but flipping them on a nonprofit community interest basis. There are situations where even a CDC could or a CHODO could do that and hold the house as a rental property. Maybe more responsibly administered rental property, but a rental property, and then sell tax credits to investors who don't manage the property but are getting tax advantages through the low-income housing tax credit. We have seen situations where, and Holy Name, it has done this, and I think some of the Des Moines organizations have as well, where you pair a rent-to-own type of scheme with an acquisition rehab resale program, by which you develop with tax credits rental housing or acquire and rehabilitate a certain number of units using the low-income housing tax credit, which involves the purchase, the development by a nonprofit developer, but the sale of those tax credits to private people who can shelter that kind of income. And then they develop new houses that in a rent-to-own regime can then be spun off to the people who are occupying the original houses. So there are ways in which tax advantages can be spun off to private owners, but usually, in most cases, there is a private private nonprofit community-based organization connected to it.
I was going to say, the one tax advantage, that program that you do have here in Kansas is the neighborhood revitalization program too, which
Yeah.
identifies the specific neighborhoods. You don't, I actually probably here, and maybe those in the room can, it's probably getting used more by some flippers or people buying them for, not necessarily flippers, but for investment property. I've talked to a number of Kansas communities in the last couple months, and most of them that have that program are struggling, I think, with the same issue that you guys are having, and that is people knowing about it and knowing the advantages that they can gain, the tax advantages they can gain by making improvements to their home. So that's a tool that is here, and like most communities, we just got to let people know a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I
That's
think
a
part-
tax abatement.
I think part of the problem with that is a minimum threshold to be eligible, and it kind of goes back to that whole value up in those areas that discourage people from investing.
Right. Well,
So,
Yes.
yeah,
right.
and the other one that I
Right.
heard from a couple other communities is that people who are just kind of just getting by, sort of, I think that it's too long-term of a payback for them to do that. They need something that's going to help them make the improvement today. They can't wait out the payback that they're going to see over a number of years through their tax abatement. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with the tax abatements is that that people, specifically in these neighborhoods, don't pay that much in taxes.
Right.
So, it doesn't
Yeah.
help all that much.